Good evening, and welcome to this fourth stage of our archaeological journey. Tonight, Facts 201 through 250. A dive into the fascinating details of an ancient world. From clay seals to underground tunnels. From lost languages to revolutionary technologies. During these 60 minutes, we will discover ancient seals. Pontius Pilate's seal. Jeremiah's scribe's impressions. These small objects that authenticated power. We will explore water and survival. The Temple Mount Cisterns. Hezekiah's tunnel. How Jerusalem ensured its subsistence facing siege. We will hear the languages of the biblical world. Aramaic, Hebrew, Greek, a multilingual universe where each language carried its weight of meaning and power. We will contemplate massive fortifications. Megiddo, Lachish, the walls that protected or failed to protect the cities of the Levant. And we will encounter modern technologies. Drones, ancient DNA, artificial intelligence. How 21st century science illuminates the ancient past. We will also ask the great questions. The Exodus. David and Solomon. How the Bible was written. The mysteries that remain. 50 discoveries. Details that change everything. Close your eyes. Let your mind travel. And discover what stones have whispered for millennia. Chapter 1. The secrets of ancient seals and stamps. Tiny objects. No bigger than a fingertip. Yet they hold extraordinary secrets. Seals and stamps from the biblical world speak to us across millennia. Quietly. Patiently. Part 201. The Seal of Pontius Pilate. In 1961, a small stone block was discovered at Caesarea Maritima. A routine find, at first glance. But the inscription carved into it changed everything. Two words stood out: Pontius Pilatus. This was the first time the man who condemned Jesus had ever appeared in an archaeological record outside the New Testament. The stone confirmed what the Gospels had long claimed. Pilate was real. He was there. He governed Judea. A small stone. A few Latin letters. And suddenly, one of the most dramatic moments in human history gains a second witness. Part 202. The Seal of Shellemyahu, son of Yozaniah. In 1975, a tiny clay seal was found in Jerusalem. Barely 1 centimeter across. The impression bore a name, Shellemyahu, son of Yozaniah. A minor official. A scribe, perhaps. His name appears exactly once in the Bible, in the book of Jeremiah. He was one of the princes who ordered the arrest of the prophet. This seal connects a biblical figure to the real world of 7th century Jerusalem. A man who once held power and left a mark on clay. Seals like this remind us the Bible is populated not only by kings and prophets, but by ordinary officials whose names survive on the smallest objects. Part 203. Royal Seals of the Kingdom of Judah. Dozens of royal seals from the Kingdom of Judah have been recovered over the years. Most bear the names of kings mentioned in the Bible. These seals were used to stamp documents, jars, supply shipments. They mark ownership. They mark authority. Among them, seals of Hezekiah, Manasseh, and other Judean kings. Each one a small proof that these rulers existed and governed. The seals also show a fascinating detail. Some bear Egyptian-style lotus flowers, others feature the sun disk. The imagery shifts over time, reflecting political alliances. Royal seals are tiny windows into the administrative machinery of ancient kingdoms. Part 204. The Seal of Berekhyahu, the Scribe of Jeremiah. One of the most celebrated seals ever found in Israel bears the name Berekhyahu, son of Negev, the Scribe. This is Baruch, the faithful scribe of the prophet Jeremiah, the man who wrote down his master's words and preserved them for posterity. The seal was discovered in the antiquities market. Its authenticity was debated for years before specialists confirmed it. A fingerprint was found on the clay. Some have speculated it could be Baruch's own. We will never know for sure. But the seal connects us to a real person, a real hand, a real moment in the life of biblical prophecy. Part 205. Seals and the Bureaucracy of Judah. The number of seals recovered from Judah reveals something important. This was not a primitive society. It was organized, administered, bureaucratic. Goods moved. Documents were sealed. Officials signed their approvals. Some seals bear titles: servant of the king, governor, overseer. A hierarchy. A system. This bureaucratic reality is sometimes overlooked in popular retellings of the biblical story. But archaeology does not overlook it. The seals of Judah remind us that behind the grand narratives of kings and prophets, there was an entire apparatus of daily governance. Chapter 2. Water, Survival and Engineering in the Ancient Levant. Water. The most precious resource. In a land where drought could mean death, ancient peoples built extraordinary systems to capture, store, and move water. Systems that still astonish us today. Part 206. The Aqueduct of Pontius Pilate. Josephus, the Jewish historian, mentions that Pontius Pilate built an aqueduct to bring water into Jerusalem. This project caused outrage. Pilate used funds from the temple treasury to finance it. The Jews protested. Pilate responded with violence. For decades, archaeologists searched for this aqueduct. Traces have been identified in the southern suburbs of Jerusalem, though debate continues. The aqueduct tells us something important. Even a controversial Roman governor invested in Jerusalem's water infrastructure. Water was power. And power was built, sometimes violently, sometimes brilliantly. Part 207. Underground cisterns beneath the Temple Mount. Beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem lie dozens of ancient cisterns carved into the bedrock. Some are enormous, capable of holding hundreds of thousands of liters of water. They were fed by channels and aqueducts from the surrounding area. These cisterns date to different periods, some to the time of Herod, others even earlier. During sieges, Jerusalem's survival depended on these underground reservoirs. Water hidden from the enemy. Water that kept the city alive. The cisterns beneath the Temple Mount remind us that beneath the sacred, there is always the practical. Part 208. The Water Channel of Megiddo. At the ancient city of Megiddo, archaeologists discovered a remarkable water system dating to the 9th century BCE. A vertical shaft descends deep into the earth, leading to a tunnel that connects to a natural spring, safely inside the city walls. This system allowed Megiddo's inhabitants to access water even during a prolonged siege, without ever leaving the fortified perimeter. Similar systems have been found at other biblical cities, Jerusalem, Hazor, Lachish. A recurring strategy in a land of recurring threats. The water channel of Megiddo is a testament to the ingenuity born of survival. Part 209. Rain harvesting in the Negev Desert. In the Negev Desert, the most arid region of Israel, ancient communities developed extraordinarily sophisticated rain harvesting techniques. Runoff farming, terraces and channels built to capture every drop of rainfall, directing it toward fields and cisterns. The Nabateans, who controlled these routes in the centuries before and after Jesus, perfected this art. Their farms flourished in the desert. Today, archaeologists study these ancient systems to understand how desert communities survived, and even thrived, in conditions that seem almost impossible. Rain harvesting in the Negev reminds us that humanity has always found ways to wrestle life from the harshest landscapes. Part 210. The Springs of Jerusalem and Sacred Geography. Jerusalem has only one natural spring, the Gihon. Everything built around this spring, tunnels, pools, channels, was built because water demanded it. The Gihon was sacred in its own right. It was the spring where Solomon was anointed king. It was life itself. When Hezekiah built his tunnel to hide the spring's source from the Assyrians, he was protecting not only water, but the heart of the city. Jerusalem's geography is inseparable from its water. The city grew where water was. It survived because water was hidden. It thrived because water was managed. The springs of Jerusalem remind us that sacred geography is often, first and foremost, practical geography. Chapter 3. Languages, scripts and the words we lost. The biblical world spoke many languages. Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, Akkadian. Each one a universe. Each one a key to understanding what was really said, and what was really meant. Part 211. The Gezer Calendar and Early Hebrew Writing. Discovered in 1908 at the site of ancient Gezer, a small limestone tablet bears an inscription in early Hebrew script. It dates to the 10th century BCE, roughly the time of Solomon. It appears to be a calendar of agricultural activities, listing the months by their farming tasks. For a long time, This was considered one of the oldest examples of Hebrew writing ever found. The Gezer calendar tells us Israel was literate earlier than some scholars had argued. Writing was not a late luxury. It was an early necessity. A small tablet. A simple list of farming tasks. And yet, it shifts the conversation about when Israel learned to write. Part 212. The Ostraca of Lachish, Letters Before a War. In the ruins of Lachish, a city in the Judean foothills destroyed by Babylon in 586 BCE, archaeologists found a collection of pottery shards covered in ink. These ostraca, broken pieces of pottery used as cheap writing surfaces, contain letters. Real letters. Written in haste, before the end came. One letter reads, "We do not see the signals of Azekah." A desperate message. Azekah had fallen. Lachish was next. These letters were written days, perhaps hours, before the city was destroyed. They are the last words of a doomed garrison. The Lachish ostraca are among the most emotionally powerful documents ever found in biblical archaeology. Part 213. Aramaic, the language Jesus actually spoke. The Gospels are written in Greek. But Jesus did not speak Greek in his daily life. He spoke Aramaic, a Semitic language closely related to Hebrew. Aramaic was the common tongue of the Eastern Mediterranean from the 6th century BCE onward. It was the language of trade, diplomacy, and everyday conversation. A few Aramaic words survive in the New Testament itself: Talitha-Koum, Elohim, Eloi, Lema Sabachthani, Maranatha. These words are like windows into the actual voice of Jesus, the sounds he made, the rhythms of his speech. Aramaic reminds us that the most famous words in history were first spoken in a language most people today have never heard. Part 214. The Elephantine Papyri and Aramaic Judaism. On the island of Elephantine in southern Egypt, archaeologists discovered a trove of papyri written in Aramaic. These documents date to the 5th century BCE and reveal a Jewish community living far from Jerusalem, with its own temple, its own priests, its own practices. The community wrote letters to the authorities in Jerusalem, asking permission to rebuild their temple after it was destroyed. These papyri show that Judaism in the ancient world was not monolithic. It was diverse, spread out, adapting to different environments. Elephantine reminds us that the Jewish story was always bigger than one city, one land, one set of rules. Part 215. How languages die and resurrections happen. Hebrew was a dead language for centuries. No one spoke it as a mother tongue after the Roman period. And then, in the 19th and 20th centuries, it was revived. Brought back to life by deliberate, passionate effort. Today, millions speak it daily. This is extraordinary. Languages die. They almost never come back. Aramaic, by contrast, is still spoken, but by very few people, mostly in remote villages in Syria and Turkey. The story of Hebrew and Aramaic reminds us that languages are not just tools of communication. They are vessels of identity, memory, and survival. Chapter 4. Fortifications, Sieges, and the Architecture of Fear. War shaped the ancient Near East. And war shaped its buildings. Every wall, every tower, every gate was built because someone, somewhere, was coming to destroy. Part 216. The Massive Walls of Megiddo. Megiddo was one of the most important cities in ancient Canaan, and one of the most heavily fortified. Its walls were massive, several meters thick, built of carefully fitted stones. They were designed to withstand siege weapons, battering rams, prolonged assault. The city changed hands many times: Egyptians, Canaanites, Israelites. Each ruler reinforced and rebuilt the walls. Megiddo is even mentioned in the Book of Revelation as the site of the final apocalyptic battle, Armageddon. A name derived from Megiddo. The walls of Megiddo remind us that peace in the ancient world was always fragile. And the architecture reflected that fragility. Part 217. The Siege Ramp of Lachish. When the Assyrians besieged Lachish in 701 BCE, they did not simply attack the walls. They built a ramp. A massive earthen ramp, sloping up against the city's fortifications, allowing soldiers to climb and scale the walls in a coordinated assault. Archaeological excavations revealed the remains of this ramp, one of the best-preserved Assyrian siege structures ever found. Assyrian reliefs in the palace of Sennacherib at Nineveh even depict this exact siege, showing the ramp being built, the city falling. The siege ramp of Lachish is a chilling reminder of how methodically the Assyrians dismantled resistance. Part 218. The Iron Age Gates and Their Controversy. In the 1950s, archaeologist Yigal Yadin claimed that massive six-chambered gates found at Megiddo, Hazor, and Gezer were all built by King Solomon. This was a bold claim. If true, it confirmed Solomon's legendary building projects mentioned in the Bible. But subsequent research challenged the dating. Some archaeologists argued the gates were built a century or more later, during the reign of King Ahab. The debate continues. It is a perfect example of how biblical archaeology oscillates between confirmation and revision. The Iron Age gates remind us that even impressive archaeological findings can be interpreted, and reinterpreted, in very different ways. Part 219. Defensive Towers and the Landscape of Anxiety. Across the highlands of Judea and Samaria, archaeologists have identified dozens of defensive towers, small fortified structures built on hilltops. These towers served as watchtowers, lookout posts, warning systems. From their height, approaching enemies could be spotted from kilometers away. Their very existence reveals the constant anxiety of life in ancient Palestine. Security was not guaranteed. Threat was always near. Some of these towers appear in biblical narratives. Others are anonymous, known only to archaeology. The towers on the hilltops tell a quiet story. Life in the biblical world was lived, very often, in a state of watchful fear. Part 220. The Fall of Jerusalem, What Archaeology Shows. The destruction of Jerusalem by Babylon in 586 BCE is one of the most devastating events in biblical history. Archaeologists have found clear evidence of this destruction: burned remains, shattered pottery, abandoned buildings across the city. But the picture is more nuanced than total annihilation. Some areas survived. Some populations remained. The destruction was real and catastrophic. But it was not the end of everything. Jerusalem was wounded, not erased. The archaeological record of 586 BCE reminds us that even great catastrophes leave complicated traces. Chapter 5. Religion before the Bible: Gods, Rituals and Sacred Spaces. Before the Bible was written, before monotheism was declared, people worshipped. They built altars. They offered sacrifices. They believed. Part 221. The High Places and Open-Air Worship. The Bible repeatedly condemns worship at the high places, hilltop sanctuaries where people offered sacrifices and burned incense. Archaeologists have identified several of these high places. Some are natural hills. Others were built up, with stone platforms and altars. These sanctuaries predate the centralization of worship in Jerusalem. They represent an older, more decentralized form of religious life. The Bible's condemnation of high places is not just religious. It is political. Centralizing worship in Jerusalem meant centralizing power. The high places remind us that the move toward one God and one temple was not instant. It was a long, contested process. Part 222. The Pillar of Ashtaroth and Female Divinity. Standing stones called Asherah poles are mentioned repeatedly in the Bible as objects of condemnation. For years, scholars debated whether these poles represented a goddess, Asherah, and whether she was once worshipped alongside God in ancient Israel. An inscription discovered at Kuntalat-Ajrud in the Negev, dating to the 8th century BCE, seems to mention Yahweh and his Asherah. A stunning phrase. If accurately read, it suggests that in at least some communities, God was not worshipped alone. He had a consort. This finding shook the world of biblical scholarship. It raised deeply uncomfortable questions about the earliest forms of Israelite religion. Part 223. The Altars of Berekhyahu. At Berekhyahu, in the southern desert of Israel, archaeologists uncovered ancient altars, stone platforms built for ritual offerings. The Bible itself mentions Berekhyahu as a sacred place. Abraham and Jacob both made vows there. It was a place where God was encountered. The altars confirm what the text suggests: Berekhyahu was a real site of worship, long before the temple in Jerusalem existed. Incense residues found near the altars confirm they were used for burning offerings, a practice described in detail in biblical law. The altars of Berekhyahu bridged the gap between text and terrain. Sacred geography, confirmed by archaeology. Part 224. Animal bones and the archaeology of sacrifice. When archaeologists find animal bones near ancient altars, they do not simply discard them. They study them carefully. The type of animal, the age at death, the way the bones were cut, all of this reveals information about ritual practices. At several biblical sites, the bones found near altars match exactly the types of animals prescribed for sacrifice in Leviticus: sheep, goats, cattle. This is not coincidence. It is confirmation. The sacrificial laws described in the Bible reflect real practices, carried out at real places. The bones near the altars are silent witnesses to thousands of years of worship. Archaeology gives them a voice. Part 225. Temple prostitution, myth or reality? The Bible mentions temple prostitutes at various sanctuaries in ancient Israel and Judah. For generations, scholars assumed this referred to sexual prostitution. But recent research has challenged this interpretation. The Hebrew word used, kadesha, may simply mean holy one or consecrated person. Some scholars now argue there was no sexual prostitution in ancient Near Eastern temples, that this was a misunderstanding, perhaps fueled by Greek and Roman propaganda. The debate remains open. But it illustrates how assumptions about the ancient world can persist for decades before being questioned. Temple prostitution reminds us we must always ask, whose interpretation are we reading? And why? Chapter 6. New technologies reshaping the past. Every decade brings new tools, new methods, new ways of seeing what was invisible before. The past is not fixed. It is constantly being revealed, layer by layer. Part 226. Ground-penetrating radar and hidden cities. Ground-penetrating radar sends pulses of energy into the earth and measures what bounces back. Walls, foundations, rooms, all without digging. At several sites in Israel and Jordan, radar has revealed entire structures beneath the surface, buildings, streets, even tombs, that no one knew existed. This technology allows archaeologists to map a site before a single shovel touches the ground. Planning becomes more precise. Damage becomes less likely. At Jericho, radar revealed layers of occupation that would have taken years of traditional excavation to uncover. Ground-penetrating radar is transforming archaeology from guesswork into precision science. Part 227. Drone photography and the view from above. Drones equipped with cameras now fly above archaeological sites, capturing images from angles and heights that were once impossible. These aerial photographs reveal patterns invisible from ground level, ancient road networks, field systems, settlement layouts. At the site of ancient Aqueduct in the Negev, drone photography revealed an entire Nabatean agricultural landscape that had gone unnoticed for decades. The technology is cheap, fast, and non-invasive. It has revolutionized the way archaeologists survey and document their sites. Drones remind us that sometimes the best way to understand the past is to look down at it from the sky. Part 228. Chemical analysis of ancient pottery. Pottery is the most common find in archaeological excavations. And for decades, it was studied mainly by shape and decoration. But now, chemical analysis, X-ray fluorescence, neutron activation analysis, can reveal where the clay was sourced. This allows archaeologists to trace ancient trade routes. A jar found in Jerusalem may have been made from clay quarried in Egypt. A vessel at Lachish may come from Mesopotamia. These findings reveal the extent of ancient commerce, networks of trade that connected distant civilizations. Chemical analysis of pottery turns humble broken vessels into maps of an interconnected ancient world. Part 229. Stable isotope analysis and ancient diets. By analyzing isotopes of carbon and nitrogen in ancient bones, scientists can reconstruct what a person ate, sometimes with startling precision. At sites in Judea, these analyses have confirmed the dietary patterns suggested by biblical law: heavy consumption of wheat, barley, sheep, and goats. But they have also revealed surprises. Some populations ate far more fish than expected. Others showed signs of malnutrition during periods of political crisis. Isotope analysis does not just tell us what people ate. It tells us about their health, their prosperity, their suffering. The bones remember. And now, science can listen to what they say. Part 230. Virtual reality and the reconstruction of ancient sites. Archaeologists are now using virtual reality to reconstruct ancient sites as they might have looked thousands of years ago. Walk through a virtual reconstruction of Herod's temple. Stand in the agora of 1st century Capernaum. Explore the corridors of an Assyrian palace. These reconstructions are based on real archaeological data, foundations, pottery, inscriptions. But they add interpretation, imagination, life. Virtual reality makes the past accessible in a way no museum exhibit ever could. It turns archaeology into an experience. Virtual ancient worlds remind us that archaeology is not just about what we dig up. It is about how we bring the past back to life. Chapter 7. David, Solomon and the question of the United Kingdom. David, Solomon, the greatest kings of Israel. Their names fill the Bible. But what does archaeology actually tell us? The answer is more complicated than legends suggest. Part 231. The Tel Dan inscription and the House of David. In 1993, at the site of Tel Dan in northern Israel, archaeologists discovered a stone fragment bearing an Aramaic inscription. Among the words, House of David. 2 simple words. But they sent shockwaves through the world of biblical archaeology. It was the first time David, the legendary king of Israel, had been mentioned in any archaeological source outside the Bible. Some scholars quickly questioned the reading. But subsequent analysis confirmed it. David was real enough to be remembered by his enemies. The Tel Dan inscription did not prove everything the Bible says about David. But it proved he existed. A king. A founder. A name that endured. Part 232. Jerusalem in David's time, what we actually know. The Bible describes Jerusalem as David's great capital, a city he conquered and made magnificent. But archaeology tells a more modest story. Jerusalem in the 10th century BCE was a small settlement, not a grand capital. Excavations on the city of David slope have revealed structures from this period. Important, but not imperial. This does not mean David did not rule. It means his Jerusalem was smaller, less grand than the Bible suggests. Archaeology does not diminish David. It humanizes him. He was a real king of a real, modest city. Part 233. Solomon's Mines, Myth Revisited. The Bible describes Solomon as fabulously wealthy. Gold from Ophir. Copper from mines. Trade routes spanning the ancient world. For decades, archaeologists searched for Solomon's mines, particularly copper mines in the Negev and Sinai. Some sites, like Timnah, did produce copper in ancient times. But the dating has been endlessly debated. Were these mines Solomonic? Or later? Recent radiocarbon dating suggests copper production at Timnah was indeed active around the 10th century BCE, consistent with Solomon's time. Solomon's mines may not be a myth after all. The wealth described in the Bible may have had a real, mineral foundation. Part 234. The Divided Kingdom, North versus South. After Solomon's death, the Bible says Israel split into two kingdoms, the north, Israel, and the south, Judah. Archaeology confirms this division. Settlement patterns change. Trade networks shift. Material culture diverges. The north was larger, wealthier, more connected to the outside world. The south was smaller, more isolated, more focused inward. This geographic and cultural divide shaped everything that followed, including how the Bible itself was written. The divided kingdom was not just a political event. It was a cultural rupture that echoed for centuries. Part 235. Was there ever a united kingdom? Some scholars have gone so far as to question whether a united kingdom under David and Solomon ever existed at all. They point to the lack of grand archaeological evidence, the difficulty of dating, the political motivations behind the biblical narrative. Others push back. The Tel Dan inscription. The copper mines. The settlement patterns. Something was there. The truth probably lies somewhere between the grand biblical epic and the skeptical minimalism. A real kingdom. Smaller than legend. Bigger than nothing. The question of the United Kingdom reminds us that history is rarely as clean as the stories we tell about it. Chapter 8. The Exodus, Searching for the Great Escape. The Exodus. The greatest story in Judaism. Slavery in Egypt. The plagues. The parting of the sea. The march through the desert. But did it happen? And if so, how? Part 236. No trace of Israelite slavery in Egypt. One of the most uncomfortable facts in biblical archaeology: there is no Egyptian record of Israelite slavery. Egyptian archives are extensive. They document workers, laborers, conquered peoples. But no mention of Israelites building pyramids or suffering under whips. This does not prove the Exodus never happened. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. But it does make the scale described in the Bible, millions of people, seem unlikely. The silence of Egyptian records invites us to ask, what exactly did happen? And how much of the Exodus is history, and how much is theology? Part 237. Thera and the Volcanic Theory. Around 1600 BCE, the volcanic island of Thera, modern Santorini, erupted with catastrophic force. One of the largest eruptions in recorded history. Some researchers have drawn parallels between this eruption and the plagues described in Exodus: darkness, water turning red, widespread destruction. If the Exodus occurred around this time, the eruption could explain some of its supernatural elements through natural phenomena. But the dating is controversial. The eruption may have occurred decades or even a century before the traditional Exodus timeline. The Thera theory is fascinating but far from proven. It shows how archaeology and geology intersect in the search for biblical events. Part 238. The Sinai Peninsula, Desert and Survival. If the Exodus happened, it went through the Sinai Peninsula. A vast, harsh desert where survival is measured in days without water. Archaeological surveys of the Sinai have found very little evidence of large-scale population movement in the relevant periods. Small groups could have crossed. A caravan. A few hundred people. But millions wandering for 40 years? The desert does not support that narrative. Some scholars suggest the Exodus involved a much smaller group than the Bible describes, and that the story was later expanded to encompass all of Israel. The Sinai Desert asks hard questions. And it does not offer easy answers. Part 239. Exodus as foundational myth. Many scholars now view the Exodus not as a single historical event, but as a foundational myth, a story that shaped an entire people's identity. Perhaps a small group did escape from Egypt. And perhaps that experience became the story of everyone. A shared origin. A shared liberation. This is how many national myths work. A real event, expanded, mythologized, transformed into something universal. The Exodus gave Israel its identity: we were slaves. We were set free. We are a people defined by liberation. Whether the Exodus was history, myth, or something in between, its power as a story is undeniable. Part 240. Moses, history or symbol? Moses is the most important figure in Judaism. The lawgiver. The prophet. The leader. But there is no archaeological evidence of his existence. No tomb. No inscription. No trace. This is not unusual for ancient figures. Many real leaders left no physical mark. But it complicates the picture. Some scholars argue Moses was a composite figure, several historical persons merged into one legendary leader over centuries. Whether Moses was one man, many men, or a symbol, his shadow looms over everything that followed. The story of Israel cannot be told without him. Chapter 9. How the Bible was written, layers, politics and storytelling. The Bible did not fall from heaven fully formed. It was written over centuries, by many hands, each with their own agenda, their own politics, their own version of the truth. Part 241. The Jahwist, the Elohist and the art of weaving stories. Biblical scholars identified, centuries ago, two distinct voices in the book of Genesis. One calls God Yahweh. The other calls him Elohim. Each has a slightly different style, a different focus, a different theology. These are not errors. They are traces of two separate source texts, woven together by a later editor into the single book we know. This discovery, known as the documentary hypothesis, revolutionized how we understand the Bible's origins. The Bible is not a monologue. It is a conversation. A dialogue between traditions, merged across centuries. Part 242. The Deuteronomistic history and its political agenda. The books of Joshua through Kings are believed by scholars to have been compiled by a single editorial hand, or a single school of thought. This school, known as the Deuteronomists, had a clear theological argument: when Israel obeys God, it prospers. When it disobeys, it suffers. Every king in the history is judged by this standard. Good kings are praised. Bad kings are condemned. The pattern never breaks. This is not neutral history. It is theology shaped into narrative. A moral framework imposed on events. The Deuteronomistic history reminds us that ancient historians were never simply reporting. They were arguing. Part 243. Writing during the Babylonian exile. The destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BCE and the exile in Babylon was a crisis that threatened to destroy Israel, not just politically, but spiritually. Many scholars believe this crisis was precisely when much of the Bible began to be written down, or rewritten. The exiles needed to understand what had happened. Why had God allowed this? Was the covenant broken? Was there still hope? The writing of the Bible, in this view, was an act of survival. A way to preserve identity when everything else had been lost. The Babylonian exile may be the single most important event in the Bible's creation as a book. Part 244. The Persians and the Canon, who decided what was scripture. After the Persian Empire allowed the Jews to return to Jerusalem, the process of defining what counted as sacred scripture began. Not all texts were accepted. Some were debated for generations. Others were rejected entirely. The process of defining the biblical canon was slow, political, and deeply consequential. It determined what future generations would read, and what they would forget. Different communities made different choices. The Samaritan Torah includes only the first 5 books. Other traditions include more or fewer texts. The canon was not given. It was chosen. And the choices reveal as much about the choosers as about the texts themselves. Part 245. Oral tradition, the stories before the book. Before the Bible was written, its stories were told. Passed from mouth to ear, generation to generation, around fires and in homes. Oral traditions are not simply less reliable than written ones. They have their own logic, their own forms, their own ways of preserving truth. Repetition, rhythm, formulaic phrases, all of these techniques kept stories stable across generations. When the stories were finally written down, traces of this oral origin remain. The repetitions, the patterns, the musicality of the text. The Bible carries within it the echo of countless voices, speaking long before anyone picked up a pen. Chapter 10. Epilogue. The questions that never end. Part 246. What we think we know, and what we don't. Biblical archaeology has made extraordinary progress. Cities identified. Kings confirmed. Trade routes mapped. And yet, the deepest questions remain unanswered. The Exodus. The conquest. The nature of monotheism's origins. We know more than ever. And we understand, more than ever, how much we do not know. This is not failure. It is intellectual honesty. The most important virtue any archaeologist, or believer, can possess. What we don't know is not a gap. It is an invitation. Part 247. The danger of certainty. Throughout history, those who claimed absolute certainty about the past, whether to confirm or deny the Bible, have usually been wrong. The Bible is true in every detail, some say. The Bible is fiction, others say. Neither position survives contact with archaeology. The truth is always more complicated, more nuanced, more interesting. The danger of certainty is that it closes the door on discovery. And discovery is the heart of what archaeology is. Humility is not weakness. In archaeology, it is the greatest strength. Part 248. Why these stories still matter. Why does it matter whether David existed? Whether the Exodus happened? Whether Jesus' tomb has been found? Because these stories shaped civilizations. They built empires. They started wars. They inspired art, music, philosophy, law. Regardless of their historical accuracy, they are among the most powerful narratives ever told. Archaeology does not diminish their power. It contextualizes it. It helps us understand how stories become the foundation of worlds. The biblical stories matter because they made us, in ways we are still discovering. Part 249. The next generation of discoveries. Somewhere beneath the ground, under the streets of Jerusalem, beneath the sands of Judea, there are discoveries waiting. Scrolls not yet found. Seals not yet uncovered. Inscriptions still buried. Cities still sleeping. The next decade will bring surprises. Technologies we cannot yet imagine will reveal things we cannot yet predict. Each generation of archaeologists inherits the questions of the last, and adds new ones. The story of biblical archaeology is not ending. It is entering a new chapter. Part 250. Sleep well, and dream of ancient worlds. We have traveled far tonight. Through time. Through dust and stone. Through silence and whisper. From the seals of forgotten scribes to the walls of besieged cities. From the springs of Jerusalem to the shores of Galilee. We have touched the edges of something vast. Something older than memory. Something that will outlast us all. The past is not behind us. It is beneath us. Around us. Within us. Sleep now, dear listener. And let the ancient world visit you in your dreams. It has so much more to tell. May the echoes of history bring you peaceful dreams. Good night.